Salem, with the vibrant colors of the changing leaves. But the combination of fallen leaves and rain can lead to clogged storm drains, local street flooding, poor driving conditions, and property damage. Each year, during fall, the City of Salem's busy street sweeping program collects an equivalent of 450 dump trucks of leaves, minimizing the impact of seasonal conditions on our city. But we need your help. Did you know that raking or blowing leaves into the street is prohibited by Salem Revised Code? This code requires that all residents remove leaves that fall naturally on their property and within the right-of-way behind the curb. The city is responsible for leaves that fall into the street. In addition to removing leaves from your property and right-of-way, please consider adopting a storm drain near you. If you see leaves accumulate in your neighborhood storm drain, follow these steps to help keep the drains clear. Grab a rake, gloves, boots, and a bin or bag to collect the leaves. Rake the leaves off the storm drain and dispose of them by placing them in the yard waste bin, compost pile, or taking them to the free fall leaf haul on the first Saturday of December. Check the website for times and locations. Remember to keep safety in mind. Never remove the storm drain cover, and be sure to remain on the curb when raking and collecting leaves. If standing water persists after the debris has been removed, call City of Salem Public Works Dispatch at 503-588-6333.
Okay, good evening. I'm calling to order the meeting of the City of Salem Budget Committee for May 13th, 2020. As a reminder, this evening we will be doing all of our votes as roll call votes. So let's start out with the roll. Can the recorder please call the roll?
Member Bennet?
Here.
Member Kaiser?
Present.
Member Tom Anderson?
Present.
Member Ninky?
Here.
Member Liang?
Here.
Member Asik?
Here.
Member Hoy,
Here.
Member Nordyke,
Here.
Member Lewis,
Here.
Member DeCarmo.
Here.
Thank you. Member Tigan,
Here.
Member Chirac,
Here.
Member Davis,
Here.
Member Mcquoid,
Here.
Member William Anderson,
Here.
Member Sund,
Here.
Member Milton. Member Milton.
He was here.
Oh, I heard him. Thank you. Thank you. I heard you. Thanks, guys.
Okay, good evening and welcome everyone. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, before we jump into tonight's agenda, I thought I'd just give a quick overview of what's on the agenda. We've seen it relatively recently, and by Josh and I's count, we have fewer than 12 roll call votes to go through tonight in order to conduct the business of the city this evening. So just to give folks just a quick run through, we're going to do minutes to start, a few erratas to the information that's been provided to the budget committee thus far. Josh will give us Budget Officer Eggleston will give us an overview of the quarterly reports and information and questions answered on behalf of the city staff. We will resume our deliberations on the CIP and hopefully end that with a motion to send that to the city council. And then we'll move into approving the ad valorem tax for the urban renewal and as well as the budget. And then finally ending with the ad valorem tax approval for the city of Salem and the budget for the city of Salem, which is going to be as designed by the city staff, broken up into 6 votes based on the areas that the budget was presented to us in. So if you've got certain things you want to discuss with the rest of the committee tonight, think about where they might fit in best in terms of tonight's good agenda. So we'll move into the second item for the agenda tonight, which is the public testimony. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic and the governor's executive orders, no oral public comment will be available, but the public is encouraged to submit written testimony to the Budget Committee. And for tonight's meeting, we have received multiple pieces of written testimony. And I believe we're up to 10 pieces of written testimony that have been provided to the Budget Committee this evening. The next agenda item is the minutes. May I have a motion to approve the minutes of the May 6, 2020 meeting?
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion from Member Chirac and a second from Member Sund.
Yes.
Is there any discussion regarding the minutes from the May 6th meeting? Okay, will the recorder please conduct a roll call vote for the approval of the May 6th, 2020 meeting minutes?
Member Bennet,
Aye.
Member Kaiser,
Aye.
Member Tom Anderson,
Aye.
Member Ninky, Member Ninky,
Aye.
Member Liang,
Aye.
Member Asik,
Aye.
Member Hoy,
Aye.
Member Nordyke,
Aye.
Member Lewis,
Aye.
Member DeCarmo,
Aye.
Member Tigan,
Aye.
Member Chirac,
Aye.
Member Davis,
Aye.
Member Mcquoid,
Aye.
Member William Anderson,
Aye.
Member Sund,
Aye.
Member Milton.
Aye.
Okay, the motion passes. And now I'd like to ask Budget Officer Eggleston to review the action items for this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The first action item this evening is errata sheet 3. As discussed at the last meeting, an errata is used to identify and correct errors and provide new information. Small errors and typos will be corrected with the adopted budget publication, but if the error has a budgetary impact or could affect comprehension, an errata sheet is prepared. In the case of errata sheet 3, a liability claim was allocated to the incorrect division and fund. The impact is a need to move the charge of $107,300 from the Building and Safety Fund to the General Fund Planning Division. Errata sheet 4 moves $300,000 from the Airport Fund contingency category to the transfer category in order to complete a transfer to the Capital Improvement Fund. It also adds the design project for the Taxiway C resurfacing to the airport projects. This project will enable the city to access $3.5 million of federal funding under the CARES Act. The actual construction phase of the project won't be until fiscal year 2022, but the design work is needed now to qualify for the funding. Errata 5 removes project 534, Riverfront Park Electrical Improvements, which was inadvertently retained in the CIP, but was removed from the proposed budget. Removing this project was a result of anticipated lower transient occupancy funding due to the impact of COVID-19. Those are the 3 erratas for you this evening.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Eggleston. May I have a motion to approve errata sheets 3, 4, and 5 as recommended by the staff?
I make a motion to approve errata sheets 3, 4, and 5 as recommended by the staff.
Second.
Thank you. I have a motion from Member Liang and a second from Member Asik, I believe. Is there any discussion?
Hoy.
Oh, I'm sorry, Member Hoy. Is there any discussion regarding the errata sheets? Okay. Seeing none, will the recorder please conduct a roll call vote?
Member Bennet,
Aye.
Member Kaiser,
Aye.
Member Tom Anderson,
Aye.
Member Ninky,
Aye.
Member Liang,
Aye.
Member Asik,
Aye.
Member Hoy,
Aye.
Member Nordyke,
Aye.
Member Lois,
Aye.
Member Carmel,
Aye.
Member Tigan,
Aye.
Member Chirac,
Aye.
Member Davis,
Aye.
Member Mcquoid,
Aye.
Member William Anderson,
Aye.
Member Sund,
Aye.
Member Milton.
Aye.
Thank you.
The motion passes. Budget Officer Eggleston, could you please review the information items and handouts this evening?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The first 4 items are the second and third quarter financial reports for the city and the Urban Renewal Agency. Item 5E is the climate actions report that was requested, climate action audit report that was requested during our last meeting. Item 5F is regarding the Lone Oak Bridge and its inclusion in this capital improvements plan. Item 5H is the summary of responses to the Budget Committee questions. In addition to the items in Section 5, the Budget Committee, as the Chair noted, has received 10 pieces of testimony for tonight's meeting. That is all the information items.
Okay, are there any questions from the committee for the Budget Officer regarding the information items? Member Lewis.
Real quick on question 2 about the top fees. One prediction is a reduction of 10%, another is a reduction of 52%. I'm curious if anybody has offhand the difference between those 2 numbers in dollars.
Great question. I can get that for you in just a second. If you want to move on to someone else, we can come back to it.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Eggleston. Member William Anderson.
Okay, this is almost the same question, but just slightly modified. So I apologize for that. I thought it, okay. It said that the budget is assuming a 10% reduction, but the projections seem to be 52%. So I'm curious about where did the 10%, or why do we base the budget on 10% if the projections are 52% in reduction?
Great question. And just to return to Member Lewis's answer, it's about 1.7 million is the difference between those two. So the 10% reduction to the top fund was made over a month ago at this point. Even now, we don't know how long the pandemic will last. We have done some scenarios for TOT that we can show you either now or at some point during the meeting to kind of show you the differences for a 10% reduction that's included, a 25% reduction, and a 50% reduction. And just to clarify, a 10% reduction is for the annual amount. So you could have no TOT for a couple months, then more amounts for the future months. It doesn't necessarily mean it's across the board for each month.
And Budget Officer Eggleston, what results area does that fall under if we'd prefer to discuss that as part of the budget approval?
Sure, it actually spans a couple different results areas. So you could discuss it either in welcome, livable community or strong and diverse economy.
Thank you. Member Liang.
Thank you, Chair Teagan. I wanted to follow up on something that we had discussed last week. It had to do with the Lone Oak Bridge situation. I remember during the last time it was discussed that we had said that we were expecting it not to come from the SDC. So is there going to be time to discuss that further in terms of why specifically it's SDC funds is going to be going towards that?
Dan, do you want to address that question, or Peter?
I'll be happy to take that. Councilor Liang, the original staff reports always indicated that transportation SDCs would be a part of the equation. The initial report when the reimbursement district was established showed that about $1.5 million from SDCs would be allocated to the project to make up for impacts not associated with the reimbursement district area. And then I think a month or two later, when council amended the reimbursement district, an additional $500,000 was added simply because the reimbursement district was reduced. So TSDCs have always been a part of the equation for building that project.
So to follow up, then, how much would the developer then be responsible for, or is it going to be now completely paid for by the SDC funds?
No, it's estimated to be a $5 million project. So the remainder is expected to be made up by reimbursement district funds. So it's not a developer. It is as building permits are pulled within the reimbursement district, each building permit will pay an additional amount into the reimbursement district funds.
Thank you.
Member Kaiser.
Thank you. Thank you, Director Fernandez, too, for providing that report. It was very helpful, and especially just to jog the memory from things that had happened a couple of years ago and were fairly complex as well. So thank you for that.
Yeah, mine too. Thank you.
Okay, other follow-up questions for city staff on the information items, including the financial reports or the committee questions. Member Mcquoid.
Back to the TOT revenue forecast. I'm still a little confused when you've got basically the experts, the people that work with the hotels, and go to them and say, what do you expect for revenue, so they can calculate what they think the TOT revenue is going to be, and it comes in at 50% less. That's from the hotels themselves. They're saying that. And so what makes it, I don't understand, if you get that right from the horse's mouth, why all of a sudden you say, well, we'll go at 10% anyway, because it could change, when they're saying on their budgets for the revenue year, it's going to be 52% lower from what they know and what they see of the impacts of the COVID virus. I still don't understand where we end up at 10 if the experts are saying 52.
Sorry, have to make sure I'm not muted. The 10% was before April closed. So in the answer, you can see that the year-over-year difference for April was 40%. The March to April amount was 30% reduction. That was only a partial year of the stay-at-home, partial month of the stay-at-home order and kind of the pandemic starting. So the 10% was the starting point. I think we can all recognize that the impact will be greater than that. But in order to balance the budget and get a budget adopted, that's the 10% reduction that we took at that point.
Member Lewis.
Just a follow-up. I'm curious, the occupancy count for April, does that include the homeless that have been put in hotel rooms temporarily?
I'm not certain of that. We can find out and let you know.
Todd is paid for stays less than 30 days. So that would include the hotel rooms being used to house the unsheltered if their length of stay is less than 30 days.
Member Tom Anderson.
Thank you very much. I'm on the same subject, the Todd subject, and what's going to happen here. And I note that we got a bunch of letters from the what we've been calling in the Council of Cultural People. That is Deepwood, the Bush Art Barn, the Bush House, etc. And Commissioner Mcquoid talked about the heads in the beds, which is the main one of that. But we're also getting very dire reports from the cultural people, and in general, I understand the city manager to say, and I'm sure he's correct, is that we don't, as the city, face a whole lot of reductions because of the way our income flow is structured. So we don't rely on a bunch of things that some other cities in the state or the state might be, where revenues are going to be down. But in this one, these are groups that are supported by the city, and they're going to be hurt if they don't get the TOT funds. So to me, that's something that we really ought to think about, and I'm very interested in the possibilities of some sort of use of funds to tide these groups over that might be able to be paid back out of TOT funds at some point, assuming that TOT funds, go back up. Because if some of these places close, they're already on the margin, and then what's going to happen there? So that's just a big concern of mine, and I don't know how we deal with this as a budget committee, but it certainly seems to me that because of that, we're moving closer and closer to having to reconvene the budget committee, because there's going to be some big drops here if Commissioner Mcquoid prediction that are predicted by the experts come through. So this is just this whole thing is very worrisome to me.
Member Lewis. Oh, yes, Budget Officer Eggleston, please.
If I may, I'd be happy to go over our forecast now, since there's interest.
That would be good, and Member Lewis will hold your question until the forecast is discussed.
Can you see my screen?
We can.
Great. So what you have in front of you are two different years. On the left is the adopted fiscal year 2020 budget in this column. So for this year, the current year that we're in, we're estimating a 15% reduction in annual collections. So we have 3 more months to go for receipts. We have April that we haven't received yet. We'll receive those in May, April, May, and then June. So we'll get June in July, but we'll accrue it back to this fiscal year. So we're anticipating a 15% reduction. So approximately $620,000 reduction to fiscal year 2020. And then for fiscal year 2021, this pre-COVID-19 is how the proposed cultural tourism budget was before we reduced it by the 10%, if that makes sense. And then this yellow column here is the current proposed fiscal year 2021 budget with a 10% reduction in tax collections. So pre-COVID-19, we have 4.2, and then the 10% reduction at 3.8. And the corresponding decrease, the only expense item that automatically decreases with the actuals is the allocation to travel Salem at 25%. So that automatically decreases. Everything else is held the same, except for the $420,000 that's listed here for that riverfront electrical vault that we've mentioned a couple times. It's been reduced. And then for two other scenarios, if you had a 25% reduction, and again, this could occur, it could be front loaded, so you could see more of that reduction up front and then more return to more normal levels later in the year at 25%, and then here's a 50% reduction. If we go a little bit lower, we have a few things that I'd like to go over. So this line right here is the ending fund balance, the projection ending fund balance. This contingency savings is just putting that $120,000 back into the ending fund balance. So you can see where it actually lands. And then at the 10%, if the 10% reduction was realized, we'd end with approximately $500,000. The 25%, it would still be a positive number barely. And then at 50%, it would be a negative number, so there'd have to be adjustments made before that point. And I will note that for both of these cases, it includes all of the events and cultural grants. So in a lot of cases, the grants are tied to a reimbursement. So if the event doesn't occur, there won't be the expense to reimburse. So there'll be some natural savings that aren't accounted for in this forecast. So just to recap, for fiscal year 2020, we have an annual reduction of 15% forecasted. For 2021, what we have in the proposed budget is 10%, and then you can see the result for 25% and 50%. And this line right here is the combined fiscal year 2020 and 2021 impact for at 10%, 25%, and 50%. So at 50%, it's a loss of TOT revenue of approximately $2.7 million. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Member Tom Anderson.
Josh, you mentioned grants, and you know, if the program doesn't happen, the grants don't happen, that reduces it. The one that comes to mind right away is the Salem Art Fair that is already canceled. And you know, we hear from the Salem Art Fair folks that, you know, they're going to lose other money because there's, you know, they won't have the entry fees and everything else. But how much does the city give in a grant to the art fair? I would think that might be one of the bigger grants we give, and I'm just curious as to how much we might anticipate saving if a lot of things like this are canceled.
Sure, and it's those amounts are detailed in your budget book. And just real quick, our recommendation at this point, those amounts are recommended by the TOT Advisory Board and flow through City Council and then the Budget Committee. We recommend any reductions would follow that same process. That would be consulted with the City Council and the TOT Advisory Board. I think Steve might be happy to say a little bit more about that point.
There's no doubt that the TOT budget will need to be amended. The challenge is by what amount. We know there will be impacts. How severe will those impacts be? And the Budget Committee could certainly try to take that on this evening, or if you chose to come back next week and try to reallocate the list that you see here. It's very challenging. Beyond the number of recipients, we also have contractual agreements with the Convention Center, and Travel Salem is codified in city ordinance. So, you know, certainly, but the Budget Committee could provide a recommendation to council that the TOT budget be reduced by the 50%, 75% perhaps. Regardless, the money won't be spent if it's not there. And as the budget officer said, I anticipate coming back to council, likely in consultation with the TOT Advisory Board, on how to resort the expenditures from the TOT fund during a time of significant but yet still unknown impacts on the revenue side.
Sorry, I'm flipping through to see hands. Member Lewis.
Thank you. I'd like to circle back to my original question, and let me try to pose it differently. The rooms that are booked are the key number that I'm looking for, and I'm curious. Again, I'm asking: are the homeless that are in the hotel rooms now being counted as occupants, and are they going towards the occupancy percentage?
I believe so, but we need to confirm. I know there's some exemptions. I'm not sure if they've qualified.
Yeah, again, my question is not about the TOT fees. It's about the number of rooms are being filled. If we are in fact counting the homeless, they certainly are a temporary element to the occupancy, which makes me even more concerned that maybe the 52% reduction is not enough. Which brings me to my second comment. Based on what you just showed us, I find it a little difficult to swallow that all of the cultural folks will be made whole, but quite frankly, the Travel Salem will lose 50% of its income. So I agree with others that this is something that I think we need to discuss. I recognize that Travel Salem is under a contract, but if I remember anything from my contract school, you spend the first part of it talking about if you signed it, you live up to it, and then the rest of the class was all about the exceptions.
Thank you. Member William Anderson.
This question is probably mostly for Josh or Steve. I certainly think that it's best that the TOT Advisory Board work with the City Council to find the specific cuts, because they undoubtedly know a lot more about this than at least the citizen members of the committee, well, myself anyway. However, it seems to me that the $772,000 potential cut could be more mitigated if smaller cuts start now, rather than waiting for, okay, we don't have the money, now we're going to do significant cuts. At the same time, doing a 50% cut reduction by the Budget Committee advising the Council could potentially cause much bigger problems. So I don't know if the plan is that this is going to be worked on immediately by the TOT Advisory Council and the City Council, or if it's something that would be waiting until the money's not there.
We're expecting action will be necessary before the end of this fiscal year, so before the end of June.
Member Tom Anderson.
As we can see, this is an extremely complex and complicated matter. I'm not sure that the Budget Committee is the place to really take a deep dive into it. I think that perhaps it might be best to accept the manager's recommended budget right now, with the understanding that very soon we're going to have to deal with this. And I think that's kind of what Josh was saying. We got to pass a budget, and we got to make it's got to be balanced. Even if at this point it's somewhat theoretical, but that's all we've got now is theories, and we'll know something more. So my presumption is that if we pass this part of the budget as recommended by the manager and the budget officer, the council is going to be looking at this very quickly with the help of TOT. And, we may or may not have to come back to the Budget Committee depending on the size of the cuts. And I would also point out that this seems to happen all the time. We spend most of our time dealing with the smaller amounts of the budget. You weren't here Mr. Chair, when we spent a whole lot of hours discussing, do we want to put $20,000 in a bocce ball court? This is a little more important than that, but that's how we end up, looking at it. And I think that's not a good use of our time at this point, but it would be a good use of the council time and in conjunction and consultation with Todd and the city staff.
Thank you, Member Anderson. Member Hoy, to add.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I concur that this is not the time to take the deep dive into it. There are other variables that are coming into play with these budgets that City Council will actually have. The city manager kind of alluded to them a minute ago. We will potentially have some additional revenue coming in from the federal government that we will be able to help alleviate potentially the situation with some of the organizations we're talking about right now. So those are outside the budget committee purview, but in the council purview that we'll be taking up actually in this fiscal year. So I think because there's so many moving parts, it makes sense to adopt it as recommended by the manager, and then we can always adjust accordingly as needed. That's just my opinion on that.
Thank you, Member Hoy. I think a good conversation. I'm going to just hopefully close this part of the agenda with one procedural question, Mr. Eggleston, and we asked it sort of last week. I don't recall seeing it in the responses, and it's about the threshold of change from the approved budget where the city, if the budget committee has to come back. And I guess, is it a percentage, and is it by the whole budget, or is it fund by fund? And maybe that matters to the TOT fund if it, has as precipitous of a decline as it might. Would the budget committee need to come back in order to approve some sort of drastic change to the TOT fund as opposed to the whole city budget?
A great question. There's no statutory requirement to reconvene the budget committee. So after the budget's recommended and adopted by the city council, or recommended by the budget committee and adopted by the city council, the governing of that budget really switches to the governing body, which in this case is the city council.
Okay. Good conversation, hearing and seeing nothing else. Sorry, I'll move us on to the next agenda item. And we will now continue our deliberations of the capital improvement plan that was begun at the meeting last week. The committee moved to continue deliberations on the city's fiscal year 2021 through fiscal year 2025 capital improvement plan. And now is the time for any additional questions of staff and deliberations. And the goal at the end of this conversation is to have a motion recommending the proposed capital improvement plan to the city council for adoption. So before we move to that, we will have more conversation, starting with Member Tom Anderson.
Thank you. I was the one who moved to postpone last time, and I also am the one who I think asked all of the questions about the capital improvement. And you probably could have seen that because I said I've ridden my bike over the bridge to Guerin Island. So the questions were answered to my satisfaction. So I don't know if we'll have further discussion, but I'm ready to vote on the capital improvement plan. And there may be more discussion from other councilors, so I'll make the motion now. I move we approve the capital improvement plan for the next fiscal year.
Second.
Okay, thank you. I have a motion from Member Tom Anderson and a second from, I'll say, Member Bennet. Is there any discussion on the motion? Member Nordyke.
I just want to confirm, we talked about a number of features to the capital improvement plan, but one of those was the navigation center. Is that still in there as proposed?
Yes, that's correct.
I'm ready to vote.
I guess I would like to follow up on some of the information provided on the navigation center and just the total amount of budget used from the Urban Renewal Agency to address homelessness issues. The amount of information provided was really good, and I'm glad to see that it's in the record. But I wonder, Director Rutherford, the one number that wasn't provided, which I'm sure others know, but I don't know offhand, is the amount used to purchase the old UGM building and the Saffron plumbing supply, the response said that that wasn't directly addressing homelessness, though it was assisting the facility of the UGM to move. So I just wondered if you had a dollar amount, how much the city paid for that to happen.
Oh, good question. That's not a number that I have right at my fingertips. As I recall, each of those acquisitions was around $2 million. I've got Renee Fraser's looking up right this second. She should be able to address that quickly.
Okay.
We have not yet closed on the acquisition for the mission. We will be closing on that when they're locating and moving out into their new facility.
Okay.
So it's been probably a little over a year since I've looked at those numbers, but I can have those to you shortly. If you would like, when she gets those pulled, we can put those in message to Budget Officer Eggleston, and then he could circle back.
That'd be great.
That would be helpful. Okay, that's what
Thank you. Member Sund.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So just procedurally, if we approve the capital improvement plan, which includes the navigation center as in there, does that sort of let me rephrase this. Does doing so mean that the navigation center will in fact be funded through the urban renewal of the downtown? Or, I mean, at this point, this is one step in the process, and then we also have to pass the urban renewal agency's budget. So at what point is it that's where the navigation center is going to be? Is that later through a council decision or through this process?
So we'd have to make it through all three processes. So if you recommend the capital improvement plan and you recommend the urban renewal agency budget, and then the council adopts both of those, then we need all three of those to align. Okay. So if you change the budget, we'd recommend amending your CIP recommendation at that point.
Thank you.
And we did just hear that Saffron was 2.1 million and the UGM was 1.5.
But we haven't closed on the UGM property? Is that what I heard you say, Director Rutherford?
Correct. We have an extended escrow on that acquisition because they're still occupying it, and we didn't want to enter into a stock arrangement there.
Okay. Does that explain? I guess I was curious with the potential future development of that property, that it seemed like a relatively low amount of investment in this fiscal year, the coming fiscal year, for design, survey, like the sort of like the first steps we'd expect to see that for that property being redeveloped. Like there could have been more investment, sooner, but maybe it's because we can't get in there.
That's right. It's because we don't have control of it yet.
Okay. Member William Anderson.
Sorry for the basic question, but what exactly is a navigation center?
Yeah, so a navigation center is a facility where you have co-located services along with shelter capacity. So it allows a number of different service providers, mental health professionals, and other service providers to be in one location, so the individuals who are unsheltered don't have to go from location to location to location to access the variety of assistance that they may need, but they can have sort of one gateway to those services. And then many navigation centers also include overnight shelter in the same facility.
Thank you.
Well, again, I appreciate the answer. Member Sund.
Yes, thank you, Chair. One more question on so right now the funds are allocated out of the CIP from Urban Renewal Agency, and then we would go back when we go back and recommend, if we end up recommending the Urban Renewal Agency budget, assuming that it's as proposed, they would work in tandem. But if for some reason it was pulled out of that budget, we'd have to come back to this one. Correct?
I would recommend that if you were to amend the URA budget, with that you'd amend the CIP at the exact same time with the same motion.
Okay. So,
please.
Chair. Yeah, I guess I just have, we kind of talked a little bit last week about the written correspondence from the Downtown Advisory Board, and in their written recommendation, they had recommended that $3.5 million of the $4.1 million targeted for a navigation center be allocated to support different projects. I think based on what I understand from reading through their comments, it has sort of just generally, I don't want to speak on their behalf, but thinking about just the intention of those funds in the downtown area and the revitalization of our downtown. And I didn't know if there was any other discussion on that. I just think it's important to note that that was their recommendation, and that essentially by us moving forward with this recommendation, we're not entertaining that recommendation at all. That we're kind of, we're hearing it, we hear what they have to say, but we're kind of moving on from that for this process.
I would take a moment to maybe build on that in one sense, Member Sund. And in some ways, it's like the transit occupancy tax. I think we heard last week that the city of Salem, through the Urban Renewal Agency, is going to make this capital investment, and that the state, we hope that the state is going to help fund the operation of it. Through what mechanism? I think that some of the contingencies of operating the navigation center are dependent on a budget that probably doesn't exist at the state level anymore, and may not exist this year or next year, but who knows what years 3 and 4 may bring. So as a budget committee member, I'm comfortable today supporting moving forward with this part of the step of the navigation center. But I feel like from moment to moment, in that 3-step process, if you will, the city council and other policymakers are going to have to decide whether that investment continues to make sense if there's not a funding mechanism to operate it. And we don't want to own a building in downtown without a way to make it a functional part of the downtown fabric. And so I guess that's some of my reasonings of asking these questions and just wanting to make sure that we're seeing it with eyes wide open. Member Hoy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I would just suggest that that's why we employ a city manager. He manages all this stuff, figures it out, makes it work, brings, comes back to us for guidance at city council. But he's certainly not going to be moving that project forward if there isn't an operation plan with funding attached that's viable. So that's a little bit of the behind the scenes stuff that we don't necessarily talk about at budget committee. But he's going to make that work, or he's going to say this project isn't viable and we're not going to do it.
Thank you. Member Kaiser.
Thank you. I would just echo what Councilor Hoy is saying. Budgets are created for things that are planned, and sometimes plans don't happen, but you still have to budget for it. So that's why I'll be supporting the urban renewal budget and the navigation center and the CIP.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor to recommend the CIP to the City Council. Any further discussion on the CIP? Okay, seeing none, can the recorder please conduct a roll call vote?
Member Bennet?
Aye.
Member Kaiser?
Aye.
Member Tom Anderson?
Aye.
Member Ninky? Member Liang?
Aye.
Member Asik?
Aye.
Member Hoy?
For the record, those were not my dogs.
Member Nordyke?
Aye.
Member Lois?
Aye.
Member DeCarmo?
Aye.
Member Tigan, sorry.
Aye. It's okay.
Member Chirac?
Aye.
Member Davis?
Aye.
Member Mcquoid?
Aye.
Member William Anderson?
Aye.
Member Sund?
Aye.
Member Milton?
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, the motion passes. All right, we'll move to the next agenda item this evening, special orders of business. Budget Officer Josh Eggleston will present an overview of the special orders of business. Josh will then walk us through each one item at a time with a motion to follow. Mr. Eggleston.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The first special order of business this evening is the approval of Salem Urban Renewal Agency property tax levy. Oregon budget law requires the Budget Committee to separately specify the ad valorem property taxes for the Urban Renewal Agency and the City of Salem. Staff recommends that the Budget Committee approve the Salem Urban Renewal Agency estimated ad valorem property taxes.
Okay, may I have a motion for the approval of the Salem Urban Renewal Agency's fiscal year 2021 ad valorem property taxes?
I'll move the staff recommendation.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion from Member Bennet and a second from Member Chirac. Is there any discussion on the motion? Okay, seeing none, will the recorder please conduct a roll call vote?
Member Bennet,
Aye.
Member Kaiser,
Aye.
Member Tom Anderson,
Aye.
Member Ninky,
Aye.
Member Liang,
Aye.
Member Asik,
Aye.
Member Hoy,
Aye.
Member Nordyke,
Aye.
Member Lois,
Aye.
Member Carmel, Member Carmel, Member Tigan,
Aye.
Member Chirac,
Aye.
Member Davis,
Aye.
Member Mcquoid,
Aye.
Member William Anderson,
Aye.
Member Sund,
Aye.
Member Milton.
Aye.
Thank you.
The motion passes. Mr. Eggleston, will you please walk us through item 7B?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Next is the approval of the Salem Urban Renewal Agency budget. Oregon local budget law requires the Budget Committee to separately approve and recommend the Urban Renewal Agency budget to the Urban Renewal Agency Board. Staff recommends the approval and recommendation of the Urban Renewal Agency Executive Director's proposed budget.
I move staff recommendation.
Okay, we have a motion from Member Hoy and a second from Member Bennet. Is there any discussion on the motion?
Can you please restate the motion? I was having problems with my feed on my end.
This is a motion to approve the Salem Urban Renewal Agency's fiscal year 2021 budget.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, seeing or hearing no discussion on the motion, will the recorder please conduct a roll call vote?
Member Bennet,
Aye.
Member Kaiser,
Aye.
Member Tom Anderson,
Aye.
Member Ninky,
Aye.
Member Liang,
Aye.
Member Asik,
Aye.
Member Hoy,
Aye.
Member Nordyke,
Aye.
Member Lewis,
Aye.
Member DeCarmo, Member Tigan,
Aye.
Member Chirac,
Aye.
Member Davis,
Aye.
Member Mcquoid,
Aye.
Member William Anderson,
Aye.
Member Sund,
Aye.
Member Milton.
Aye.
Thank you.
The motion passes. Mr. Eggleston, will you please walk us through item 7C?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Next is the approval of the City of Salem property tax levies. Oregon local budget law requires the Budget Committee to separately specify the ad valorem property taxes for the Urban Renewal Agency and the City of Salem. Staff recommends that the Budget Committee approve the City of Salem estimated ad valorem property taxes for both the permanent rate and the general obligation bond debt levy.
Motion to approve.
I'll move staff recommendation.
Okay, I have a motion from Member Milton and a second from Member William Anderson. Thank you, Member Bennet. Is there any discussion on this motion? Okay, seeing or hearing no discussion on this motion, will the recorder please conduct a roll call vote?
Member Bennet?
Aye.
Member Kaiser?
Aye.
Member Tom Anderson?
Aye.
Member Ninky?
Aye.
Member Liang?
Aye.
Member Asik?
Aye.
Member Hoy?
Aye.
Member Nordyke? Member Lois?
Aye.
Member Carmel?
I'm back. Aye.
Member Tigan?
Aye.
Member Chirac?
Aye.
Member Davis?
Aye.
Member Mcquoid?
Aye.
Member William Anderson?
Aye.
Member Sund?
Aye.
And Member Milton?
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, the motion passes unanimously. Okay, members, the final item this evening is the approval and recommendation of the city budget. This approval can happen by result area as it has been presented by city staff. The first area we will consider this evening will be good governance. Mr. Eggleston.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a quick slide for you tonight. So as a reminder, good governance, the total for the result area is 112 million, total staff of 199.68, and then you can see the major programs and departments listed here on the slide.
I move staff recommendation.
Second.
Thank you. I have a motion on the floor from Member Hoy and a second from Member Tom Anderson. Is there discussion on this motion? Mr. Eggleston, it would be helpful if you could close your shared screen so I can see the members of the committee. Member Sund.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure if we discussed this last week or not, but on page 64, make sure, yeah. The increase in budget analysis and oversight for building and safety. Can you just describe that? And I do apologize if we discussed this, I just don't recall.
I don't know off the top of my head, but what I would suppose is that there was a change in allocation methodology, and I think there could have been a vacant position that was filled in that division because they have a budget analyst there now. And Norman Wright might be able to offer more information.
Hi, can everyone hear me? Okay, great. So we have allocated this funding for a one-year pilot project to fund a code officer through the Building and Safety Fund. Funding a position that we currently have through that fund allows us to dedicate the resource explicitly to identifying and dealing with and ultimately clearing any additional blight, dilapidated buildings and dangerous buildings that we see throughout the city. So this is essentially a code officer that's dedicated to building safety, though it not be what we would necessarily find in permitting is what we see instead on the code enforcement end. I'm not sure as to why it's necessarily housed in the budget analyst and oversight line item, but this effectively is the is where those funds are going to be dedicated.
Okay, thank you, Director Wright. Member Nordyke.
Hi, and I think this question is for Director Wright or perhaps Manager Powers. I'm sure they can decide who best to respond. So one of the things I've been talking to with our budget staff is about performance auditing and performance management. And as I understand it, there is a performance management framework that is currently in the works. And I was wondering if this is something that you can share a little more information with us. As I understand it, this is about getting performance metrics and about being an internal process of sorts. Can Manager Powers or Director Wright provide a little more detail?
Certainly, as some budget committee members may remember, some councilors may remember, when City Council adopted the strategic plan, one of those priorities, one of those initiatives was to move our budget to a more policy or initiative-based approach. I think you've seen that in this year's budget, and to then also have measures, key performance indicators to help staff, council, budget committee, the community better understand what we are accomplishing with the resources that have been entrusted to us. We've been working on that. Norm has taken the lead in developing key performance indicators, and we can certainly share the status of that work with you, with council, as we are intending to do in the future. And again, Norm can provide a brief status report if you'd like this evening.
Brief would be great. I know we have a long agenda, but I would appreciate that.
Sure thing, Councilor Nordyke. So we're currently in the drafting process of an initial set of key performance indicators that align to every result area and every order of business, be it internal or external. And we're working very hard with every management analyst across the entire organization, every department, and we expect to have a draft set of these KPIs. It could be fairly complex when you first see it, but it'll hopefully make a lot of sense, and we should have that draft available by the end of this fiscal year for our department heads and the city manager to see, and then ultimately in some form or fashion for council to see, ideally translated in the next community report, and perhaps even sooner, so that you can get a good understanding of how this framework is currently being developed. So we're moving along nicely, and the city manager should see the very first draft again by the end of this fiscal year.
Well, thank you, Director Wright. I appreciate that. You know, I know that people in our community want to see accountability, they want to see oversight, and they want to see whether our city programs are getting their intended results. So I'm all in favor of performance metrics. An organization that I used to oversee its budget for, we have developed a scoring sheet to help determine whether our programs were aligning with our priorities with that organization. And I appreciate the fact that our budget materials already use some form of scoring, but I look forward to geeking out with you guys on this in the months to come. So thank you for doing that, and I look forward to getting more information.
Thank you, Member Nordyke. Other comments, questions regarding the motion on the floor to approve the good governance portion of the City of Salem budget? Okay, seeing or hearing none, will the recorder please conduct a roll call vote?
Member Bennet?
Aye.
Member Kaiser?
Aye.
Member Tom Anderson?
Aye.
Member Ninky?
Aye.
Member Liang?
Aye.
Member Asik?
Aye.
Member Hoy?
Aye.
Member Nordyke?
Aye.
Member Lewis?
Aye.
Member Carmel?
Aye.
Member Tigan?
Aye.
Member Chirac?
Aye.
Member Davis?
Aye.
Member Mcquoid?
Aye.
Member William Anderson?
Aye.
Member Sund?
Aye.
Member Milton?
Aye.
Thank you.
The motion passes. Mr. Eggleston, will you move us to the next results area?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next results area is natural environment stewardship, a budget of just over $19 million and 91.95 FTE employees, and it includes the climate action plan and then 3 environmental programs.
Thank you, Mr. Eggleston. Are there questions of staff or any other discussion related to the natural environment stewardship result area? Member Tom Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This relates right now to answer number 5 on page 4 to the sheet that was provided to us by the staff, and the question, excuse me, it's either 5 or 6. I don't have my glasses on to see, but it's the last one. Has the city considered transitioning the city's fleet to electric vehicles? I don't know whether that comes under this or something else, but the thing that was curious to me is the third sentence that says the city does not have the infrastructure necessary to support electric vehicle charging. I'm curious as to how much that infrastructure might cost. And I do note that at least one of the parking garages, the one across from the convention center, I'm not sure which one that is, they've got 3 or 4 electric charging stations right there, and they don't seem like it's a whole lot of money. So I'd like some sort of response to the electric vehicles where appropriate issue from somebody at staff.
Thank you, Member Anderson. Mr. Eggleston, is this the appropriate time to address that concern?
It's either this one or the one we just approved, so this one works.
Let's go with this one. Maybe Director Fernandez wants to address Member Anderson's question.
No, I don't think I do.
I think this is probably mine.
Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize.
So this is
Thank you, Chair Tigan.
I just like to randomly point to people on the screen, so.
That's okay. So right now on the vehicle replacement list, there is only one vehicle that would be eligible to switch to an electric vehicle. The city fleet that could be turned to electric vehicles is predominantly located at the Civic Center. The charging stations in the parking structures are intended for the public, and certainly we could use those. However, we would like to encourage the public to continue to use those and not have city vehicles taking those over. The library, when it reopens, will have electric charging stations. And in fact, we're looking at a solar-powered electric charging station for the library. The current Civic Center parking structure structurally is not such that the electrical infrastructure necessary to put in the charging stations would be supported. So we would like to use the library parking structure to install the electric charging stations, and given that this year there's only one vehicle on the replacement schedule that could be turned to electric, it makes more economic sense for us to delay that for a year until the library opens, and then know that we'll have a greater number of replacement vehicles that could be turned to electric in the next budget year than we do in this current budget year, and have achieved the economy then of including those with the library retrofit.
Thank you, Director Hanson. Member Anderson, do you have a follow-up question?
Yes, I do. I wasn't at all suggesting that the city staff should be using the electric charging stations that are in the public parking. I was just saying it doesn't seem like it's that expensive to put what those are in there, but I appreciate Director Hanson's discussion of the economies, both of cost of changing out the electrical system in the Civic Center, and also the fact that right now there's only one potential vehicle. So I look forward to what we can do in the library when that comes online. Thank you.
Member Hoy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this is also for Director Hanson, I believe. Do we happen to, can you tell me, is the transit incentive program, or I'm not sure what we're calling it, for city staff included in this budget?
We looked at if you mean the bus pass program. So yes. We had such a low interest from staff right now of securing bus passes for a variety of reasons, obviously, that the cost of bus passes will be absorbed by the departments because there were just simply not that many at the moment. There becomes a tipping point, and I don't remember what it is off the top of my head, where paying for the individual passes becomes more expensive than the group passes. But when we discussed this with transit, we would have had to buy passes for every single city employee. And we have city employees in police and fire who would never be able to use transit because of their shifts and their schedules. So We're going to start with reimbursing employees who desire passes. We'll reimburse them 100%. The departments can bear that in their budgets. And then when we reach that tipping point where it would make more sense to buy 100%, even though we know there is a large number of people who are outside the city core, then we would choose the employer all paid.
Thank you.
Additional questions for city staff regarding the natural environment stewardship result area?
By the way, I hadn't heard a motion yet, so I'll move the staff recommended budget for the natural environment stewardship result area.
Thank you, Member Chirac. And we have a second from Member Hoy.
Councillor Asik does have a question, I believe.
Thank you. Member Asik.
Thank you. Just more of a comment as someone who drives a car that doesn't require a charging station. You can just plug into an outlet. I will say that the infrastructure doesn't have to be special for an electric vehicle if you buy the right electric vehicle. So keep that in mind. I know there's only one car this year, but my car could just plug into any outlet. So.
Okay, any other discussion on the motion for this result area? Okay, seeing and hearing none, will the recorder please conduct a roll call vote?
Member Bennet?
Aye.
Member Kaiser?
Aye.
Member Tom Anderson?
Aye.
Member Ninky?
Aye.
Member Liang?
Aye.
Member Asik?
Aye.
Member Hoy?
Aye.
Member Nordyke?
Aye.
Member Lewis?
Aye.
Member de Carmel?
Aye.
Member Tigan?
Aye.
Member Chirac?
Aye.
Member Davis?
Aye.
Member Mcquoid?
Aye.
Member William Anderson?
Aye.
Member Sund?
Aye.
And Member Milton?
Aye.
Thank you.
The motion passes. Mr. Eggleston, will you move us to the next results area, safe community?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next result area safe community has a total of just over $116 million with 542.02 staff. It includes the programs and departments listed on the screen.
Okay, thank you. Are there questions of staff or any other discussion related to the safe community result area? Member William Anderson.
Okay, I have a two-part question about this. One relates to page 108. These are the challenges facing the police department. In the comments, it mentions that 2018 to 2019 has had either flat or a downward trend. But when we look at the graphs, ever since 2016, especially with violent crimes, it's gone up significantly. I remember from last year, the chief was talking about how we used to have over 200 police officers, and now we were down into the 180s. And so the first part question, is there any consideration for increasing the number of officers we have beyond the one behavioral person? The second part question is on the next page. Traffic enforcement is budgeted at a little over 1.6 million. And my question here is, if the city is able to continue to do this speed radar, or the green light speed system, can that bring the spending on this down and allow for more money to be put into hiring more police officers? I don't know if that would be a viable thing, because I know there's a lot of other traffic crimes other than that.
Police Chief Moore, if he's available.
I am paving Chair Teagan and the Budget Committee. I'm actually not the person that's in charge of whether we're going to be adding any police officers to the organization. I will tell you, Member Anderson, I think several years ago, we probably topped out at about 196 police officers, and today, authorized staff other than grants, we probably have about 188 or so. We are certainly behind the curve in officers that are necessary. If someone on the street stopped me tomorrow and said, how many police officers could you use? And I've indicated this previously, I would say 40, and I could put all of them to good use. The last couple of years, I've made a request for 11 police officers, but clearly the budget wasn't able to support that. So that's where we are. As far as your question about the photo red light and speed on green, I think those are simply additions to our ability to enforce traffic laws throughout the city. And there is still a necessity for the motor officers that are in the traffic enforcement unit as they respond to a variety of issues in the city. They work the special events. They respond to all serious traffic accidents and many non-serious accidents. They are the ones that work traffic enforcement in our school zones and throughout our neighborhoods, along with our patrol officers. And we could certainly, since it was asked, we could certainly use more of those officers too, as traffic is one of the biggest complaints we get at neighborhood association meetings and in emails and letters.
Thank you, Chief Moore. I think we have a comment question from Member Hoy and also Member Bennet.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to sort of provide my perspective to Member Anderson's question. And the reason, there's kind of a two-part reason here for not being able to increase the staff. The good news is the City Council had the foresight to put the operating fee on. We simply imposed the operating fee several months ago that required every household to pay $8 a month. And that's why we are breezing through this budget tonight and not wrestling with a lot of layoffs and budget cut questions tonight. So that's the first part of the question. The reason we're not able to add officers is because of the COVID-19 situation, had to, the only right thing to do was to withdraw the payroll tax that we were considering from the ballot. Because of the current financial situation of the entire country, it just wasn't prudent to let that go forward. But that's what would have allowed us to increase that staff is that additional revenue that would have come in from that payroll tax. So that's my perspective on that.
Thank you, Member Hoy. Member Bennet?
Yeah, Chief, I had a question. I'm thinking back a few years, but we had a point at which we had a substantial number of officers back in that 190 whatever period, officer period. But in fact, we had a substantial number of those left vacant. They weren't being filled of those budgeted positions. Now, this is my recollection. You're welcome to correct me. How many of those do we have now that are sitting empty?
Well, you are correct, Mayor. I think in years past, to be able to get through our budget, we were directed to leave many of our positions unfilled. This current council and maybe just before have indicated that is not how they wanted us to operate. So we were it's very rare that we're fully staffed because someone retires or somebody leaves. But we were very close to being fully staffed. I'm not sure the exact numbers today, although somebody may be helping me out here. We actually have 7 vacant positions right now, but we are testing to try and fill those. And our goal is always to be fully staffed as far as police officer positions.
I guess the question I've got is we could certainly authorize more. I think there's a problem too, if I understand it, in just keeping those positions filled. I mean, to hit those numbers, even really, really close. 7's good. That's still 7 officers not on the street because you haven't had a chance to fill them yet. And the nature of your rotation and the amount of time it takes for training, the requirements to hire, it just feels like you're finding the right balance. I think we look forward to the day we can authorize more officers and you have a chance to continue to fill to a higher capacity. But it seems like we're really running at a pretty good clip right now with the number of officers on the street.
Yeah, I will tell you, we may not get the quantity of applicants that we used to get. I think all law enforcement has that, but we've been very fortunate with the quality of our applicants. I will tell you, I truly believe if we were authorized more, we could fill them. We will fill the 7 that we currently have as soon as we possibly can. But in this day and age, we do have numerous officers that are of the age where they're able to retire. So we will continue to have some vacancies as we move through this.
Well, just keep yours filled, okay? That's the...
For a little while.
Thank you, Chief Moore. Member William Anderson.
I fully intend to support the proposal, and thank you very much for your answers, Chief Moore, and your service to the police department. Hopefully, I understand that COVID-19 has caused some changes, so thank you, Chris, for explaining that as far as why the payroll tax was reduced, but hopefully in the future they'll be able to revisit that and increase the police force. If it hasn't been moved, I would like to move that we do approve the staff request for the public safety.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Member Kaiser. Second. Is there any further discussion on this motion? Mr. Member Sund.
Thank you, Chair. This question is for Police Chief Moore. So on page 108, the note about after several years of increasing crime rates, we saw a 2.8% decrease in reported crimes for 2019, which is positive. What other, and then further on, it talks about the number of officers per 1,000 resident population continue to lag those of larger cities. Other than that metric, which I do believe like in last year's budget, we went into this quite a bit. But other than that metric, what other metrics do you really find would be important for us or anybody listening to know about the level of resources that we have? And what did we hear in the resident satisfaction survey about police services for Salem?
Well, I'll start with the easy question. I think the citizen survey for police and fire services was very good, quite frankly, and I would like to think that that goes to the quality of the officers we have and the ability that they have to provide police services to this community. Probably the biggest metric that most law enforcement agencies use is officers per 1,000. I guess the scale would say that Portland probably has about 1.5 officers. Beaverton might have 1.4. It moves down. We're probably of the 5 or 6 largest agencies in the state. We are probably about 6th or so at about 1.14, and or thereabouts. I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but I think I'm pretty close. That's probably the one that everybody looks at. I think what we look at internally is where do we have needs, and we probably have needs almost everywhere, and we try to identify those and bring those forward and let council know where those needs are.
Thank you.
Any further discussion on this motion? Okay, seeing none, hearing none, will the recorder please conduct a roll call vote?
Member Bennet?
Aye.
Member Kaiser?
Aye.
Member Tom Anderson?
Aye.
Member Ninky?
Aye.
Member Liang?
Aye.
Member Asik?
Aye.
Member Hoy?
Aye.
Member Nordyke?
Aye.
Member Lois?
Aye.
Member Carmel?
Aye.
Member Tigan?
Aye.
Member Chirac?
Aye.
Member Davis?
Aye.
Member Mcquoid?
Aye.
Member William Anderson?
Aye.
Member Sund?
Aye.
Member Milton?
Aye.
Thank you.
The motion passes. Mr. Eggleston, will you please move us to the next result area, safe, reliable, and efficient infrastructure and capital improvements?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the results area, it's just over $141 million, and for construction, just over $232 million, and with a total staff of 238.7 FTE. It includes transportation, streetlight, the geo bond debt service, and then most of the utility.
Okay, thank
I
you,
move staff
Mr.
recommendation.
We have a motion on the floor from Member Hoy.
Second.
A second from Member Kaiser. Is there discussion about this motion? It's a significant chunk of the city's budget. Maybe I'll wait for an uncomfortable 3 seconds this time, Member Hoy. Can't stare across the room quite way we all used to, I suppose. Okay, seeing and hearing none. Making sure I'm following along. Will the recorder please conduct a roll call vote?
Member Bennet?
Aye.
Member Kaiser?
Aye.
Member Tom Anderson?
Aye.
Member Ninky?
Aye.
Member Liang?
Aye.
Member Asik?
Aye.
Member Hoy?
Aye.
Member Nordyke?
Aye.
Member Lewis?
Aye.
Member DeCarmo?
Aye.
Member Tigan?
Aye.
Member Chirac?
Aye.
Member Davis?
Aye.
Member Mcquoid?
Aye.
Member William Anderson?
Aye.
Member Sund?
Aye.
Member Milton?
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, the motion passes. Mr. Eggleston, will you move us to the next area, strong and diverse economy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The result area is a total of $12.8 million with 31.55 employees, and includes the departments and funds listed on the screen. Slide.
Thank you. Are there any questions of staff or any other discussion related to the strong and diverse result area?
Move staff recommendation.
I have a motion from Member Asik and a second from Member Hoy. Any discussion regarding the motion on the floor? Okay. Seeing and hearing none, will the recorder please conduct a roll call vote?
Member Bennet?
Aye.
Member Kaiser?
Aye.
Member Tom Anderson?
Aye.
Member Ninky?
Aye.
Member Liang?
Aye.
Member Asik?
Aye.
Member Hoy?
Aye.
Member Nordyke?
Aye.
Member Lewis?
Aye.
Member DeCarmo?
Aye.
Member Tigan?
Aye.
Member Chirac?
Aye.
Member Davis?
Aye.
Member Mcquoid?
Aye.
Member William Anderson?
Aye.
Member Sund?
Aye.
And Member Milton?
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, the motion passes. Mr. Eggleston, will you move us to our final result area of the evening, welcome and livable community?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The total for the results area is $30.5 million with total staff of 133 FTE, and includes the programs and departments listed on the slide.
Are there any questions of staff or other discussion related to welcome and livable community result area? Member Nordyke.
Yeah, I wanted to touch base. I know this includes the HRAP program, and I'm trying to find the amount on my page. How much are we funding, recommended funding, assuming this passes, for HRAP for the upcoming fiscal year? And is it more or less than prior years? Because I know in prior years, we had to actually right size fit it because there weren't enough participating landlords. And I know this has been an extremely effective program for reducing homelessness. Does the budget officer have that number in front of him?
So the current year, fiscal year 2020, was funded at $700,000. The proposal for next year is $1.1 million, an increase of $400,000 for the HRAP.
And we are anticipating that we have enough landlords to actually meet that additional funds.
That is correct. And I believe Director Rutherford could elaborate if you'd like.
I don't think that would be necessary. I know we talked about this before. I just wanted to confirm before I made my vote. Thank you.
Mr. Eggleston, in our earlier conversation about the TOT, we made some reference to potential funds that could address some of the concerns coming before the council. Is that in relation to the block grants, or are there other elements of the CARES Act that might be helping in that? Can you address that?
Actually, if Director Rutherford wouldn't mind.
I would be happy to.
Thank you.
Yes, so travel and tourism, destination marketing is covered through the CARES Act under the Community Development Block Grant. So those programs would be eligible for Cdbg funding. The cultural and heritage organizations would fall under a different category, and we are looking at a proposal that would make some of our normal general fund allocation to nonprofits available for those organizations. So that is something that was recently shared with City Council and will be coming back to them to formalize.
Thank you. Member Hoy, did you have a question for earlier?
No, but I'd be happy to move staff recommendation.
Second.
I'd be happy to second it.
Okay, I've got a motion from Member Hoy and a second from Member Lewis. Thank you, Member Ninky. Member Sun, did you have a comment or a question?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Budget Officer Eggleston, what was the number you referenced in the prior year or the current year budget for HRAP?
Great question. I'm glad you asked. I pulled it up. So on page 167 is the Homeless Rental Assistance Program, and you'll see $1.5 million listed there. They're kind of structured in cohorts. So the cohort for fiscal year 2020 included $700,000 of new money, and then there's carryover funds from the previous groups of clients.
Okay, yeah, I just was wanting to make sure I wasn't reading that number wrong.
Oh, thank you for the clarifying question.
And then the other, if I could, Chair, follow-up question.
Absolutely.
Last week, we talked a little bit about the new positions in the planning division. I know there was some testimony about that, and just remind me again what the process is if, I guess at what point we would start, if these positions were appropriated, at what point we would start. What would we need to know in order to then actually start to fill those positions?
Maybe Director Wright would address that question.
Yeah, certainly. So just so I'm clear on the question itself, is the question that you want to know more about when we would take action on actually filling those positions if they were authorized in this year's budget?
Yeah, we talked a little bit last week about, if we do in fact start to see a big slowdown in permits, knowing that, the last year is really no indication of the next, given experiencing. Just what are we going to be watching for? What will you be watching for that, we can look for in maybe a future meeting just to pay attention to, or will it just kind of happen?
Yeah, I understand now. Thank you. So our first two positions that are highlighted in this proposal would probably be hired as soon as we have some sense of when we're going to fully reopen to the community again. The first position is a planning manager. It's not a position that we can easily fill by some sort of remote interviewing process. So logistically, we just have that issue even as volume continues to be at or above average month to month. The second position, which is the sign inspector position, again, we will likely hold off on that until we again can interview a person in person. That being said, I just want to reiterate that our volumes for both sign permits as well as for all of our other cases do continue to be on average at pace with every other month that we've seen. So we expect that those two will continue. Our third position, we will continue to monitor our situation. And if we do see our cases go down, say, to something equivalent to 250 cases per planner, that case per planner ratio is what we keep monitoring. If we see that volume start to go down, as it may, then that position will remain unfilled until we see not only the volume, but also the subsequent revenue that we think can support it. So I would not expect that we will fill any of these positions within the next 3 months. And that's just based on our reopening scheme that we are somewhat considering. And I'm not trying to put a time frame on that. I'm just saying, so for the next quarter, we're going to be watching this very closely.
Thank you, Director Wright. Any other questions for staff on this area? Member Bennet.
Thank you. Norman, I had another question. We had received, and I was quickly looking through email, couldn't put my hands on it, testimony, I think, in advance of our initial budget committee meeting from Annie Battey around questions of support for neighborhood group activities. Do you recall that? And do you have some answer for what's going on there? I remember $1,400, and that's trying to remember how the whole thing came together. I was hoping you would.
Yeah, I can't remember the specifics of her request either, but I do remember it has to do with a recurring $1,400 expense that we normally commit to our neighborhood associations, and that is in the budget, and we do intend to still be able to dedicate that as we do every year. So
there's no change in the neighborhood allocations for directly to neighborhood association support?
That's correct.
Great,
no changes.
Member Kaiser.
Thank you. Just to follow up a little bit on that, the neighborhood partnership, the allocation in the budget for, I'm looking at page 164, the neighborhood partnership P1, neighborhood partnership P2, I'm guessing partnership 1, partnership 2, and the neighborhood partnership special outreach. I noticed those are empty, and I thought you had talked about this last week, and I don't quite remember yet, but what is happening there?
With our existing neighborhood partnerships, we continue to honor the funding that was dedicated to the partnerships that are already in play, but we have not sought any new partnerships at this time. So everything, again, I think this also relates to that 1,400. I'm waiting on more information to confirm. All the same, we, again, do continue to move forward with the partnerships that we already have in place.
What happens to the positions that were supporting the neighborhood partnership program?
Yeah, so this goes a little ways back, and this was last year's budget that I think we worked this out, though my memory is a wee bit fuzzy here. We had a wonderful person who was in charge of our neighborhood partnerships, Jessica Price. She resigned to become a full-time mom, and we celebrated her departure. At the same time, we reassessed a number of our positions in last year's budget and realized that one of our great needs continued to be in customer service for our code enforcement unit. And so the position that was vacated, we then repurposed it for the sake of supporting customers and customer needs in code compliance, and effectively continuing the neighborhood partnerships in the capacity that they already existed, and having that work effectively be shared by Irma Dowd, our neighborhood liaison, as well as by some of our other staff in the neighborhood enhancement division.
Okay, thank you.
Member Bennet.
I just want to share with you kind of an ongoing concern over the past number of years as I've watched the neighborhood program deteriorate for about a decade. And it sounds like we're down to one person, over-dedicated, being potentially supported by, I don't know if they're volunteer staff out of your office or how that's put together. I'm really concerned about it. One of the real outstanding programs here that has been a big part of code compliance satisfaction has been through those neighborhood groups. And I'm very concerned about where we're headed. I hope we'll have a stronger answer, stronger feeling about where you're heading with this when you come in front of the council with this budget. I really am concerned we may be headed the wrong direction here.
Member Kaiser.
I guess I'll just piggyback a little bit onto the mayor's concerns, because I am as well. I've noticed neighborhood association support outreach, I guess, just very much decline. And I think when that happens, the neighborhood associations, as much as they're independent bodies, they also do need perhaps some additional support and steering a little bit, even just to kind of know how things work, especially when it comes to land use. And I think the more we disinvest in that, the more we're going to disinvest in our public processes, because it's complicated. I don't think anybody denies that. And I would very much hope that's not our intent as the city to disinvest in public engagement in that way. And I don't believe that that is the case. I'm a little concerned to see just in the budget line items here, how things are aligned to the policy areas, and all the neighborhood association line items say either least or less, which I just completely disagree with, that those have the least alignment to our core services of the city. I guess I would really challenge the city to re-examine that, and if they're not seeing value in that, then what are you doing, I guess? So, because I think it's self-evident to me. Perhaps it's not to others, but I just think it's incredibly important that we invest in those groups, and the more we invest, the more value we're going to get out of that for the public.
Thank you, Member Kaiser. Member Ninky.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, just in regards to neighborhood associations, I'd look at several faces on my screen here, and I think many of us actually moved up through the neighborhood associations to become involved in public service. So there is a benefit there. We went through several phases where there was a city staff person and they went away, and then counselors became the liaison, and it has degraded to a large extent. I know there's, at least the ones that I attend, are still doing wonderful work and pushing forward good feedback to the city, as well as, potentially developing new leaders to come down the line as well. So I encourage that we maintain our support for those groups and expand it as we're able.
Member Nordyke.
Hey, I have attended a lot of neighborhood association meetings since I joined council. And I was not able to attend every single one of them, but whenever I didn't have a conflict, I attended the majority of them. And you do see the same faces over and over again at the neighborhood association meetings, which means that we're getting great institutional knowledge from the folks who are regularly engaged. And that is a wonderful thing. But I do think that, when I talk to neighbors in my community, it's clear that many of them have no idea that we even have a neighborhood association meeting. And I think it would also be great to find new ways to get new blood invested. And that's not just through city money. I think it really behooves all of us to talk with our neighborhood leaders to let them know that, hey, even if you're not able to attend this meeting, do your neighbors know that there is a meeting? Do they know that they're going to be talking about, a major change that might be happening in the community, whether it's, new speed bumps or new development or what have you? There's a lot of things that are discussed of great importance at neighborhood association meetings. And it's where I got a lot of great input and insight for me personally. But I think that there's really a lot of work that our volunteer members of the neighborhood associations can do to help increase that outreach. There are very few young families who participate in those meetings. I think part of the problem is when they're held. A lot of them are held during the times when young families are busy taking care of their kids. And that makes participation a great challenge, a fiscal challenge, a personal challenge, a physical challenge in many ways. So I think there are ways to improve the scope and the reach of these neighborhood associations, but not all of them are through money. A lot of them are just through encouraging folks to just talk to each other, talk to your neighbors, and get them involved.
Thank you, Member Nordyke. Member Liang?
I believe Member Asik has a question also.
Okay. Member Liang and then Member Asik.
Thank you. I want to echo Councillor Nordyke. There are several association meetings I attended, and times come and it's usually a meeting. For example, I know somebody who's joined one of the neighborhood associations as actually now as part of the board because I had asked them to come to the neighborhood association meeting so I could actually, they wanted to have a chat conversation with me, and that was just the best time that fit for us to continue having that conversation before and after the neighborhood association meeting. And I think there has to be different ways that we would encourage more participation, especially encouraging younger families, and perhaps even taking consideration like what times that the meetings are. It could be any day of the week, usually Monday through Thursday in the evening. Of one neighborhood association that meets in the morning hours on this retirement mobile home 50 plus location. And we need to ensure that we have representation and voices of our community members who are actually at the table, who want to be involved but then just aren't able to be in.
Okay, thank you, Member Liang. Member Asik.
I just want to second the fact that it sounds like IRMA is going from being one person serving 18 neighborhood associations to a person serving 18 neighborhood associations plus several other roles, including her role in the Emergency Operations Center for translation and things. So it's just unfortunate to hear that that is one of the places that we're being cut, because the outreach isn't just one neighborhood at a time. It's also these big efforts that we make that are going to have less support. So I just wanted to echo all those comments.
Thank you, Member Asik. Member Sund.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Quickly, just a comment. I did stumble across a organization that will pay, and I think Councillor Liang was featured in an article that I stumbled across with the PolitiCit nonprofit that will pay, I think, up to $200 for parents to attend at government meetings, city council, neighborhood association, various things, reimbursed for those things if people want to get involved, which of course right now, not a lot of gathering going on, but something to consider. I have a question though for Budget Officer Eggleston. With the HRAP, with the current FY20 budgeted amount in there, that 1.5 million, where are we at? And I was trying to find it, but maybe you could help. Where are we at through March or April, whatever results you have available as far as actual year to date with the program spending wise?
Sure. I don't have those in front of me, but I can get them back to you. One of the unique features about that is the cohort enters the program at different times throughout the year, so you have to have the funding for that cohort available for them to finish the program. So that carryover function is necessary to make sure that the funding is available when they finish the program. I know it looks like it inflates the amount, but it really doesn't.
Okay, yeah, I think it would be good to see that amount, but I appreciate it.
Yep, happy to.
Okay, thank you. Good discussion. We have a motion on the floor to, I believe, a motion on the floor to pass the Welcoming and Livable Community Result Area budget. Any further discussion on this motion? Okay, seeing or hearing none, will the recorder please conduct a roll call vote?
Member Bennet?
Aye.
Member Kaiser?
Aye.
Member Tom Anderson?
Aye.
Member Ninky,
Aye.
Member Liang,
Aye.
Member Asik,
Aye.
Member Hoy,
Aye.
Member Nordyke,
Aye.
Member Lois,
Aye.
Member Carmel,
Aye.
Member Tigan,
Aye.
Member Chirac,
Aye.
Member Davis,
Aye.
Member Mcquoid,
Aye.
Member William Anderson,
Aye.
Member Sund,
Aye.
and Member Milton.
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, the motion passes. That was our final motion for the evening on the City of Salem budget. If you'll bear with me for a moment as we work through the remainder of the agenda. This would normally be the place where we have public testimony for future budget issues, but no oral public comment will be available this evening. If there is written testimony, it can be submitted to the City of Salem Budget Office. I guess I'll take a moment of privilege as the chair and thank the members of public who have engaged in the process. This is not our normal procedure, but we've had a lot of input from the city's residents, and I think on behalf of the entire budget committee, I want to thank everyone for tuning in at home, the only way you could participate, and just want to thank everyone for their commitment to the process. And certainly we're hearing that a lot in the last result area as well. Discussions of the Todd Advisory Board, the Downtown Advisory Board. I really think that the boards and committees are what make this city very, very special, and want to just reiterate what others have said this evening. Before we adjourn this evening, the next meetings related to the fiscal year 2021 budget will occur as follows. Mark your calendars. Monday, June 8th, 2020, fiscal year 2021 budget and state revenue sharing public hearing will be held. And on Monday, June 22nd, 2020, the fiscal year 2021 budget and CIP adoption will be held by the City Council. Okay, this is your last chance. Is there any other business for the Budget Committee this evening? Seeing none, we're adjourned.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Wonderful job.
Nicely done, Mr.
Thank you, everyone.
Good job.
Thank you.
Really
Well done, everyone. Thank you to the city staff.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you for your service.